Okay, first bill up, House Bill 142, Commercial Filing Systems from the Blockchain Committee. It slides.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Appropriations Committee. House Bill 142 Commercial Filing System Update is a product of the Select Committee on Blockchain, Financial Technology, and Digital Innovation Technology. This is something we've been working on for a few years in trying to work with the Secretary of State's office to develop a first-of-its-kind world-class corporate filing registration system that integrates digital identity concepts, which are blockchain concepts, to authenticate and authoritatively represent a corporation and individuals in a way that enables what are called smart contracts in cryptocurrency, digital asset, and blockchain realm. No other state has such a capacity, and we would like to leapfrog Delaware, quite frankly, to the point where our corporate filing system is the envy of the country and the envy of the world. So, Mr. Chairman, why would we like to do that? Delaware makes $1.3 billion a year off of corporate filings. Our office profits around $50 million a year, and they can give you the exact numbers there. I think it's 2 years. 1 year, 2 years. 2 years, my apologies. $50 million a biennium on corporate filings, and we're among the very best already. Right? We don't have a bad corporate filing system, and we certainly don't have a bad corporate system in the state of Wyoming. We have an incredible corporate system. But we know that there's a lot of market out there that we can capture, and if we do it right, then we can up that $50 million number, hopefully, by another 100+ million, and obviously most of that money comes back to the general fund as revenue that we would be able to spend. So as we're looking for options and pathways forward to diversify our revenue streams, this is one where we're actually growing the state's economy while diversifying the revenue stream, which is sort of a win-win approach. Good morning, Mr. Co-Chairman. So the concept here is, again, not to disrupt and not to supplant the efforts that are going on right now, but to provide an opportunity for the Secretary of State to work towards this world-class corporate filing system that we've taken some testimony on during the interim. And we had testimony from a former chief technology officer from one of the foremost cryptocurrency corporations, their exchange effectively, that came in and said that this would truly be revolutionary. This would be game-changing, and that it is the kind of thing that, honestly, if there were a potential commercial endeavor, he would have been willing to invest in it. And this is somebody who can bring a lot of dollars to the game when investment takes place, and champion the effort, try to make sure that others bring attention to it, and lead to this world-class development. And it's all part, it's a puzzle piece in a larger picture of what we're trying to do with digital assets, cryptocurrency, and blockchain technology. So this is just a piece, but it's a very important piece, because for corporations to be able to engage fully, corporations have to authoritatively be able to utilize smart contracts. Smart contracts are a feature of some emerging cryptocurrency types like Ethereum, Cardano, and some other emerging technologies. Those smart contracts basically automate transactions in a cryptocurrency or blockchain space and enable kind of the next generation of this business technology. Well, to be able to engage in an authoritative smart contract, you have to have some authority that recognizes the authentication mechanisms that are used in smart contracts, which are cryptographic keys, and they're public and private cryptographic key pairs. And the idea that Wyoming would, for example, be able to say, this is Acme LLC of Wyoming, and its public key is this. We know that. We're the state of Wyoming, and we authoritatively stand behind that. Not only do we stand behind it, but that information is on a blockchain, which the industry knows is immutable, distributed, secure. and any change to it is going to be recorded, so we won't question that. That enables business. That enables businesses from all over the world to look and say, oh, you've got a state entity that stands behind this cryptographic key as being the public key for the corporation that we want to engage with. We're good. We're going with that company. So it is very much a revolutionary step, but what we're looking for is effectively some resources for the Secretary of State's office to work towards these objectives. And we do that by capturing some of the revenue stream that they develop through this proposed legislation. First, starting off with a request for information and analysis, effectively trying to find out and scope the problem. And you'll see that that's a $250,000 appropriation to bring some funds to generating that RFP and then establishing an account that would provide for the development of this. Mr. Chairman, committee, I've also been working with the University of Wyoming, our Center for Blockchain Technologies and staff there, and actually they're very interested in a partnership. My hope is we don't need this. My hope is that this money gets to go away and not be spent, because the University of Wyoming can put together sort of a university to Secretary of State's office partnership and then bring in some private sector, public-private partnership to do this development in a way that would lead to some win-win-win outcomes. And I've been working with the Secretary of State's office and the university, Mr. Co-Chairman and the committee on trying to make that happen. But this is another option. This is a path. And so we tried to develop a series of paths forward to get that accomplished. Mr. Chairman, walking through the bill quickly. Actually, before we get to that, Mr. Co-Chairman, if you wanted to have any comments before we walk through the bill, I'd defer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would just like to follow through and clarify on maybe a few things. One is the concept of it being on a blockchain. I do want to point out that one of the nice things about how this bill is drafted is that the key is that it's a distributed ledger. So blockchain is it's, I guess, it's the preferred technology, I would say, of the co-chairman and of the committee, but this is not technology specific. As long as it's a distributed ledger, it could be any other technology. The key is to have a distributed ledger. The key is to have the API. And I would echo the comments on the funding. I would say that $250,000 is really the appropriation of this bill. $250,000, and so the appropriators understand where that number came from. I just looked at what we did with the ETS study, and I said, we originally set aside $750,000, but we only used $250,000. Well, actually, we appropriated $250,000, but we did it for $190,000. So kind of a similar concept really is what this is. $250,000 is, we have these hearings, and our good Secretary of State's office is always present at the hearings. We've had the Delaware Secretary of State's office. We've had industry testifying, but there's just a lot of information out there in terms of what this technology can really do and how Wyoming can benefit from it, and most importantly, how it will attract new businesses to Wyoming to do business here. So that study, that's really the idea, is to help get some money to the Secretary of State's office so that they can bring in some experts and really see what the benefit of this system is and how it is different than just, say, filing business maintenance documents online through an existing website. I don't know if if my good co-chairman talked about what an API really is, but just in brief for the committee, what we're talking about is, picture your Secretary of State's website right now. And Chairman Nicholas, you'd be familiar with this, setting up LLCs as an example. You want to set up a business, you want to maintain the business, you can do a lot of that work through the website. And it's a really state-of-the-art, great website. But what we're talking about is an entirely different process, where you have two different, potentially, actually, you have an infinite number of softwares and hardwares that can communicate with them. So I'm a registered agent or law office, say, and I have an office and I have all these corporate clients, and they want to maintain their business. They can come to me and say, we have a change in stock, we need to update the articles to reflect our stock, which is something that happens all the time. To do that, I've got to file an amendment. Using an API, I would benefit as a businessman if I had a specific software program in my office that communicated directly with the Secretary of State's their software on the other side, not their website. So I don't go to their website, I don't log in and put the info in. Instead, I've got it all built, as the good co-chairman referenced, smart contracts. I've got it all built in a system on my software that is maybe filled with a bunch of if-thens. So if these things happen, there's automatic amendments get filed. And the benefit to that is we learned in Delaware, for example, registered agency is actually a professional, really a heightened professionalism, as opposed to here in Wyoming where we have a few companies, they work 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Some law firms take up registered agency. But in Delaware, it's big business, and they file amendments at midnight. Well, picture being a businessman. Okay, now I got to employ someone 24/7 to file amendments. Not with API, because I build all of that in through smart contracts into my software. So when I get the text as the owner from my client, my big business client who says, I need this amendment and I need it now, and it's 11:58, then all I got to do is communicate with my software and everything goes through. And maybe I don't even have to do that because I've got a bunch of if-then set up in the software. So it already knows if these scenarios take place, my client wants the amendment. And so business maintenance is heightened. So that's the API. That's the technology we're talking about. It's a whole nother level because I think the Secretary of State you have a great website, and it's very, and I don't want to downplay that. It's very 21st century. We're talking about a whole nother level. So I wanted to drive that point home, and that's the $250,000 spend to really understand what that technology does. The good co-chairman is absolutely correct. The hope is we don't spend the other dollars, and it's more than a hope. We know that because when we started this adventure, we had companies that said they would do it. Now the good co-chairman's working with the University of Wyoming that could develop it. And the last little piece I'll say is on the court side. So you'll see the Supreme Court's now in here. And the reason why is because we've actually had a company come forward that's interested in doing that as well. And the benefit to getting this off and running now, while we're setting up the Chancery Court, is it would be very similar to what Delaware did. Delaware's had e-filing for over a decade in their Chancery Court. It actually started in the 1990s. I can't remember if it was 91 or 92, 93. Whenever the Chancery Court was propped up in Delaware, they started with an e-filing system from the go. And this, I think the Supreme Court would testify and would say they appreciate the reality that if they can start the Chancery Court off on that e-filing system, that's very similar, that there would be huge benefits going forward, as opposed to the struggle we're in now in Wyoming, where we're trying to move our entire court system to the e-filing system. We build it from the beginning, it's a little bit different. So that's why they're built into this. And the fiscal note, I did notice the Supreme Court mentioned that they would like the feasibility study themselves. So that's not built into this bill. Whether you say, okay, well, here's $250,000 for a different branch of government to do the feasibility study, or whether the one feasibility study, in my mind, through the Secretary of State's office, is probably going to get you pretty close. So, Mr. Co-Chairman, Mr. Chairman, those are my just opening remarks on the bill, and I would certainly defer to my co-chairman to walk through the bill.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One last quick thought on the API, which is a good example, is right now, if you want to file one corporation or register one corporation through the website, that's going to be easy, and you're going to think, all right, no problem. Do 1,000. Do 1,000 corporations on the website and sit through that and point and click and pay the payment each time, and then see how long that takes. With an API, 20 seconds. With you pointing and clicking, you're going to hire someone to do that because you're not going to want to click that many times, apparently, except for the good Representative Schwartz, who's willing to point and click 1,000 times. The power of an API is very different from the power of just a direct web interface, and that's something that we want to make sure is there. So, Mr. Chairman, walking through the bill quickly and seeing how we get to these concepts, Section 1 directs with a may clause that the Secretary of State may develop and implement by December 31st, 2021, this filing system through which all required filings as defined later may be submitted. I know the Secretary of State's office is interested in narrowing that scope of that definition. I'll get to that in a moment. It is a little bit broadly written. And then it talks about some of the characteristics of the filing system, which shall have an API and application programming interface is what we're talking about. Appropriate security, authentication of corporate identity. That gets back to the corporate identity and cryptographic signatures that I was discussing a moment ago. Other components, and it will endeavor to use a blockchain or other distributed ledger technology. Paragraph B, going on to page 2, indicates that you'll consult with third parties and necessary stakeholders to get the appropriate information and develop this as necessary. And then 2 is, if possible, partner with technology innovators. And that's where we've had a lot of interest. This was not our idea. This was the idea of an awful lot of people that came to us and said, boy, if Wyoming really wanted to separate itself from other states, this is what you do. And then we had them saying, and we'd like to do that for you. And honestly, most of them are willing to do it as a proof of practice so they can sell it to larger states later. So they don't even want an awful lot of resources.
Mr. Chairman, do we want to wait or ask questions as we go?
Your preference.
Well, then I would like to ask a question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at the top of page 3, we refer to law enforcement, and I'm assuming this is kind of a highly specialized law enforcement. Do we currently have any capability?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, no, we don't. But honestly, again, with this blockchain group, we get folks weighing in from all over the place. So the idea that it's just Wyoming law enforcement that's touching base with us isn't accurate. We have, one of the entities actually employs a former head of crypto crime from the FBI as a tech person that's working with them. So we've had a lot of opportunity to work with law enforcement that get into the digital asset and crypto realm, and those are the folks that we're specifically talking about is more on the security side with regard to law enforcement and with regard to concepts of money laundering and bank security and some of the other issues that we've gotten into. Those would be the folks that we would want reached out to. I don't think we have in-state expertise that's sufficient to really weigh in deeply on this. That's not to say that there isn't some internal expertise, but we would want to reach beyond and make sure we've got stakeholders.
Follow up then. So I assume that gets built into the cost of the Secretary of State's office to do this?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, honestly, there's just a lot of volunteerism in this, really. When we reach out to somebody and we ask them to come be involved, I can't tell you how many unbilled hours of highly paid lawyer time we've had coming into this committee. If we had to pay the hourly for the work we did on, for example, digital identity, where I probably had 10 two-hour meetings of 8 highly paid lawyers working on those concepts, yeah, we'd have bankrupted the state by now. So I don't anticipate having to pay these experts, honestly. I'd anticipate reaching out. Yeah, write that down. Yeah. Any further questions? Good, okay. Continuing on then, Mr. Chairman, we've got some definitions. We mentioned what an application programming interface is. We're endeavoring to use blockchain, and this is something we've been discussing for a number of years. Romanet 3 is required filings. That's where I believe the Secretary of State's office has some concerns and wants to narrow the scope of that. It is pretty broadly written. They want it to be business filings as opposed to every filing going to the office, which makes an awful lot of sense, but I think they'll raise that concern, and we're open to getting that language so that it properly addresses what should be filed. Page 3 on to 4 is with regard to the Supreme Court. And again, as Co-Chairman Olson said, we would like to work with the Supreme Court, and we'll follow up, have some more discussions with them. I know that with the Chancery Court, they're already planning on having e-filing up and running on December 1st when the Chancery Court goes live. But if there's anything that we can do as a synergy with this legislation, we could benefit from that as well. On to page 4. Section 2 is rules and regulations. 3, Mr. Co-Chairman, what was this? Oh, I know what it was. We had a similar statute, Senate File 70 or House Bill 70, one of the two, from a couple of years ago that was very similar to this, where we were trying to work through this corporate filing system with the Secretary of State's office. And so we are repealing that, which was in session law, and replacing it effectively with this updated version. Section 4 is developing, as you can see on line 17, what's called a corporate filing computer system account is created. And the first $4.5 million collected through corporate filings are going to pour into that account, and then everything else goes through the standard distribution. This $4.5 million, you'll see how that's broken down over the next few paragraphs into a couple of possible expenditures.
And Mr. Co-Chairman, I would just clarify that's corporate filings under 17, 16, 630. So those are the annual renewals, not an initial filing for a new company, but just the renewal. The 50, generally the $50 could be ratcheted up.
Yeah, exactly. So if that gets ratcheted up, then that would affect the flow there. Again, the concept here is reinvesting in a moneymaker, where we know we make a lot of money here, but we can make an awful lot more. One other thing that we don't have an effective system for, and nobody really does, is electronic filing of UCC filings. And if we get to the point where the API accepts UCC filings as an automated electronic filing practice, then we definitely would be in first place in the country in terms of ease of use. And if you incorporate that into smart contracts, where the smart contract provides the UCC filing as necessary and automates it, there's a tremendous value to the corporations to be able to file all of their UCC filings without necessarily having to fill out the piece of paper, and at best scan and send. At worst, take it down.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, on 1716, 1630, you said that's the annual renewals. Do you know about how much is generated annually off of those renewals?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, probably a better question for the Secretary of State's office, but what I think I'm recalling from the fiscal note is that it would only take 1 year to fuel that account is the estimation. So I'm going to say, yeah, so the bill would divert 4.5 million in corporate license tax revenues collected, and beginning on April 1st, 2021, the diversion would end after depositing it. Oh, it is assumed that the 4.5 million diversion would be completed in fiscal year 2021. So I'm gonna, as I recall, it's more than 4.5 million. I just don't recall exactly what the number is.
Thank you.
And tailing on to that, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to either you, Senator Rothfuss or Chairman Olson. So as I read that, then the appropriation would end a year later in June of 2022, and which is telling me that you figured within that year's time, the study, whatever needed to identify the system, it's adequate time.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman Larson, yeah, that's correct. So, and I mean, theoretically, that account, I don't think there's a constraint on how I don't think the bill perfectly constrains the filling of the account. It could take place spread out over time, but I think it would be beneficial to fill the account in the 1 year. The study itself probably is, between getting the RFP out, that's a couple months, and then, getting through the study, that's a couple more months. Again, just using the ETS as an example, we started that right after last session, and you had a full report at the end of it was October, November, somewhere in there. So I think the idea is by the time you're to the end of 2021, they've had the full study, they know what the feasibility is, they know what the cost is, and they decide whether they need to use any other portion of that account.
So thank you, Representative Olson or Chairman Olson. And Mr. Chairman, if you could maybe even help me here on page 5, there on 16, it says The appropriation shall be for a period beginning with the effective date of the act and then ending in June 2022. So if you guys were in, if whomever was in the process and wasn't completed by then, the appropriation stop, all funding stops. Am I reading that accurately? And is that the way you want it to be? Or
Well-
is,
Mr. Chairman, it intentionally gives us another legislative session, right? So we will have the 2022 budget, and this would end June 30th, and that's not an accident. So it is intended to work exactly, Representative Larson, as you say. And if it's not working, if we need more time or whatever else, that would be something then for consideration by appropriations at that time. Honestly, this process is way too slow. We want it to go far quicker than the timeline that's laid out here. We know that Texas wants to do this. We know that Delaware already started this. And were it not for the fact that they had a change in political seas and had a different governor come in that deprioritized it, we already would have lost the race. So yeah, if we don't have that money spent by June 30th, 2022, I don't know that we need to come back and ask for it again.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, the constraint intentionally there, because when I had mentioned earlier, really the appropriation is the 250,000. I mean, that's really our goal. That's really all we want to spend. And just to reiterate the point of the good co-chairman, when the idea was the bill that's being repealed that was referenced in the repealer on page 4, basically when this venture started, it was, let's set it up, let's get it done. And we've worked with the Secretary of State's office, and I think we weren't at a place where we were all on board. And so the study is to hopefully get us to a place where we can all be on board.
well, and I understood that. I just wanted to make sure that if you were in the midst of a contract and the work wasn't completed by that time, that the appropriation would end at that time.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, to continue.
Just a second,
My
if I may,
apologies.
Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, I'm looking at page 5, starting with the Secretary of State will contract for services. There's no reference to ETS in here, and is that intentional? Because this committee, just as a comment, and Chairman Olson is very aware of this, that we have had some problems working through issues without ETS being involved. So I just need to know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Swartz, really good question, actually. When, we intentionally plugged into this language on page 5 that it would be in consultation with our select committee. I think if this committee thought that made good sense to include ETS in the process, actually, they may be, no, we didn't run that. We didn't run forward with that bill. I was going to say that may be a separate law that requires it anyway, but we're not there. But the idea was at least we get the technology committee involved in it and hopefully can help shepherd along any questions or help really vet the RFPs, vet the process. And we've talked a lot with the Secretary of State's office on that, and they, I don't want to speak for them, but I think they would say they want us on board because they want us helping through that system, primarily because we've got all these different actors out there that want to do this for free as a concept of proof, and so there's just people chomping at the bit to do it.
Follow up, if I may. So I guess then the question is, if we amended this to include ETS, would that be okay, or is that a problem?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Swartz, I don't think that would be a problem at all. I think it would.
Does ETS attend your blockchain meetings?
Mr. Chairman, they have. I think they ended up with a permanent, they didn't start with a liaison, but I think they ended with a liaison that's always there. So they do attend. And they did participate in this. I remember in the early conversations, ETS did.
So let me just tell the committee where I'm heading out with this bill. I'm going to substantially revise it. I'm not going to do the 4.5 million. We'll just directly appropriate 250,000, probably make it 350,000 so we can add the courts into the study. But creating an account and taking 4.5 million and giving them $1 million to figure out how to advertise and all that, I think that's premature. So we support it, but and the numbers are so willy-nilly. My guess is this system is going to cost a hell of a lot more than 2.5 million. If just looking at what we have seen in the past. We've also been having discussions with the state, with the Secretary of State's office, just to upgrade their whole system. And so this really has to tag on with that. And so if we need additional language, just so that if we're going to look at this type of system, it needs to be integrated with the systems that would just make the office function more efficiently and more electronically. So Karen, does that make sense? So we're going to add a little bit of language like that so we can piggyback these two obligations. That might be $500,000 then to get the right appropriate study. And all we're doing is taking Peter to pay Paul by grabbing the fees till they're $4.5 million. Hell, we'll give you the money. We'll just appropriate on a general fund instead of doing this catch as can, and just make the whole thing a lot simpler. So what we'll do is I'll work on this draft bill today and tomorrow and bring it back to you guys so you can kind of review it before we get there. That makes sense?
It does, Mr. Chairman. I did want to clarify one thing, and that's on page 6, and you referenced the advertising. Yeah, this is interesting that it's in here because it's totally separate is really what it is. And what this is just advertising for business in general is what this million is.
Yeah, but I think we ought to have the machine up and running and have everything working before we start advertising what the hell we're going to do with $1 million. It just doesn't make sense. It's the cart before the horse. So I just want to take this incrementally. I think it's a better way to do it. I mean, it's a great concept. And this is the footprint for the plan, but I think we've got to go sequentially. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On those thoughts, there's a couple of things that I'd ask. One is, I really think that this has to be dynamic over time. If we build a 1.0 and then we get ourselves into the situation we're in with every agency in the state, where if you want to make a 1-bit change, flip a 1 to a 0, they come back with $1 million ask, and we have to go through an RFP process, and we have to do it all over again. This is evolving too quickly for us to end up with a static product. And honestly, in the view of the select committee in our discussions, it's probably going to be a better outcome if we have a partnership between the Secretary of State's office and the university, blockchain center, and get the university engaged in some development, public-private partnership where an entity has the capacity to benefit from maintaining this software rather than doing it as a one-off. So you can imagine some sort of a transaction fee where a portion of that transaction fee goes obviously to the Secretary of State, as it always has, but then a portion goes back to the entity that was the development entity. I think that's the only way we'll have long-term viability of this. We'll have one good year if we write some code, pay a few $1 million for that code, then 5 years from now, we have to come back and do it again, and we have to go through an RFP process. So as you contemplate a draft, please keep in mind that vision as being what I consider to be the viable vision for this to be future-proof, is something that can evolve.
So I would suggest that you send me particular language that covers that component of it. I'll just add back in. I don't disagree with my nephew and Laramie. He says that's going to be the future, essentially. So.
Yes. Yeah, and I've worked with the university president and the blockchain folks. I think there's a lot of upside to that.
So that can wrap in, that whole concept really ought to be wrapped into the study.
Yes.
And what it means, how you articulate it, and how you sell it to everybody. And so and if we're back to a $600,000 study, like we originally were with ETS, so be it. But if that's, we just need to make sure we have sufficient funds.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, that brings to the second point, which is I'm happy to have ETS involved, but I do not want this to move at the speed of bureaucracy. And I do not want it to languish in a slow approval process where months go by as another state passes us. And so in consultation with is a great phrase, but with the approval of is a much less positive phrase.
Typically, what ETS does, when they look at something, they either have the expertise or they don't. And if they don't, they just tell you that.
Okay.
And that's basically the way they present it to us
Mhm.
on a regular basis. But we would like them to keep up to snuff with it because
Right.
at some point, they're going to have to be actively involved in ongoing maintenance and servicing. And just like UW, it would be nice to develop that expertise in ETS if we're going down this chain.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was gonna say, that's where I'm at. I don't think ETS would, I don't think they have the expertise to deal with API. I think it's a very new concept for our state, but I think they would benefit greatly from seeing the process and learning with it.
so committee, now you've heard my thoughts on this. Any other comments? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're right on. If you really just need 250,000 to progress with the study, that's what we ought to be appropriating, not appropriating the 4.5. So, Mr. Chairman, I concur with your thoughts.
Okay. Go ahead.
One other point on that, though, and the reason why the 2.25 was here, that'll be zero funds for development. So we're putting all of our eggs in the basket of the University of Wyoming is going to get people to do it for free. And again, the idea that we do a $250,000 study and we wait a year and we read the study and we come back and we go through this process again is a great way to end up in second place, and second place is the first loser in this technology.
True, but until we know what the study says, and we have a cost projected, I mean, this study could come back in and says it's going to cost 60 million. I mean, this is going to be more complicated than YDOT's system, theoretically. We don't know.
Probably not.
But what we don't want to do is throw 2.5 million of it before we know if it's going to even work, and have a reasonable assessment from a third party to make those decisions.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I totally understand the conservative nature of it, but I'm just saying, you know, this is the way we tend to decide things, is let's approve 1 year and then approve the next and study. That is not the way to win in this game. It's just not.
Yeah.
And we can do it, but it's not the path to victory. So it really does just tell me, go get the university to do it for free,
So,
which is
well,
fine.
Actually, the university is probably slower well, it's slower getting this done than we are, so. That's my experience.
Mr. Chairman,
Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss,
Mhm.
I assume the feasibility study will look at the economics of this whole thing. I mean, I find the idea really intriguing. Some of this intuitively makes sense and other parts of it don't. Say, for example, UCC filings, I'm just not sure there's a market in Wyoming for filing 1,000 UCC filings in 20 minutes. I just don't think there's a market for that, but there could be a market for mass filing of original corporation filings, for example, theoretically. Although if I wanted to create 1,000 companies in Wyoming, I would create one series LLC and 999 baby LLCs and do it in one filing. So, I'm just curious about the market of it. I'm particularly intrigued about what you said about the public key imprimatur of the state. That's kind of a really interesting idea. I don't think that's not a required filing, and frankly isn't in here. But to me, that's maybe where the growth is. I don't know. But, so
Well,
that's my question.
Mr. Chairman and Representative, we have heard requests for all of the things that I laid out, and the idea that, yes, right now, nobody's doing 10,000 UCC filings in a day and registering 10,000 corporations, and we did set up a series LLC approach so that you can have your 10,000 little chicks of the LLC as a means of solution for that. But again, getting to the point where the actions, when you integrate all of these concepts, I think it's hard for us to envision how they'll be used. But we're empowering an industry in a way that they're not empowered elsewhere. So the idea that, well, nobody's asking, or nobody's doing that somewhere else. It's true, nobody's doing that somewhere else because they can't. And if we provide a foundation for the next generation of digital business, then we can get an awful lot more registrants and we can get a lot of activity here. And if I know this committee is looking at filing fees, and honestly, I think we should have small registration filing fees for the LLC chicks and for other things that are relatively small. Because those, as you increase the number, which is what Delaware has done, you start to get, you don't have to have high filing fees to get an awful lot of money when you've got lots of filings. And that's kind of the business model, so to speak, we're looking at is lots of nickels and dimes adding up to an awful lot of money at the end of the day.
Okay. So we'll be back in touch.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next, House Bill 148. So basically we'll table this and we'll come back up with amendments on this in the next day or two. So committee, this is a familiar bill for us. Welcome, Karen. So have you had a chance to look over the bill, and does it look like what you gave us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it certainly does.
Any comments or changes or corrections?
Absolutely none, Mr. Chairman. It's exactly
Okay.
what we have discussed many times.
Committee, any questions? Secretary of State's office. And so the number, so just so I'm trying to remember, that you had, this was going to derive about 1.8, and then your internal rule changes were going to derive about another 2.5 or something like that. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, because our fees are set by statute and by rules, this bill would generate approximately almost 1.9 million a year, or 3.7 million a biennium.
Right.
And when we then change the fees that are set in our rules, we will generate approximately 5.5 million a biennium in totality between.
In totality.
Mhm.
Questions for Karen? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman,
Steph.
I'm sorry. I take it that these fee increases are designed not to have a significant chilling effect on the number of the filings.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, that is absolutely correct. When we looked over all 214 fees that our office assesses, and we also looked at our trends nationally, particularly with our business filings, where we rank nationally, where we rank with our surrounding states, these fees are very modest. That will keep us in that competitive edge that we currently have. Right now, surprisingly, Wyoming is in one of the top 3 states, Wyoming, Nevada, and Delaware for business filings, and that will keep us there.
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just missed what the 2 million something was related to the other revenue stream.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, the 1.9 million is the revenue generated by this bill per year, and that will be almost 3.8 million a biennium. The remainder comes from our fees that are set by rule, and we will adjust those accordingly to what this final bill comes out at. Because this bill only addresses some business entities, and our rules address the others.
Okay.
Thank you.
Further comments, further questions?
Mr. Chairman, I think, if I may, I think we've seen it before, but you had a quick summary sheet that showed when the last time many of these were increased. Is that correct? Could you share that with us again? Because I have misplaced it somewhere in the cloud.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, I would be happy to do that.
So what I'm
Thank
going to do, Karen, is I'm going to sign this bill for presentation to Representative Stiff. And so he will be needing that information and getting the handouts to present it on the floor. It'll be fun. Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions for Karen? Seeing none. Any public comment? Any public comment? Anybody in the waiting room? No one in the waiting room. Close public comment. We have a motion on the bill. Moved by Representative Larson, seconded by Representative Stiff. Discussion. Seeing none, roll call.
I'll leave it open for Representative Kenner. Representative Larson. Representative Schwartz. Representative Simpson.
Aye.
Representative Stiff.
Aye.
Representative Walters. Chairman Nicholas.
All right. So if you need anything, get a hold of Karen. I think I've got those handouts someplace here and there, whatever it is. Okay, thank you. That's the way we knock those babies out. Next is 150, is that right? All right. Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, we've heard this bill. Through there, in review of the final, in review of the bill by LSO Legal in the final, there was one concern that they had on the authority, thank you, on the authority that they provided an amendment for. I am a little, and so they provided an amendment for us that in essence, it just says that if there's federal dollars that come in that the governor wants to accept and expend that meets the criteria requiring him to come before the legislature, that it doesn't go through management council, and there was 2 or 3 steps that we've done there. They thought that was problematic. It just says that this committee represents the legislature and that we would meet and then make a recommendation back to the president, the Senate, on whether to poll the respective bodies and have them come into session. And then the governor has to wait until we either meet in session or that the president or the speaker verify that they don't have enough votes to call us into session.
I'm just curious if we did a substitute bill or if we just did a new bill. Are you comfortable with the amendment and how you presented it? That's my question.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I must confess, if you read, if you look at the amendment, members of the committee, and maybe the reason I'm asking you to do this is because it might just be me. Okay. If you look at the end of if you look at the language of starting in line 19, where it says the committee shall vote whether to recommend the legislature should meet in a special session pursuant to Section 7 to consider acceptance of federal funds. The presiding officers of each house shall poll the members. Then the last sentence, it says the governor shall not expend the funds until the earlier of, and then it says, then we only have Roman and I, which is the certification of either president of the Senate, that the members of the Senate or the House have not elected to call their body into special session. And the earlier of this being one, what's the other? It is what and so does that mean is the other, is the House and the Senate being 2 things or 1 thing? Or is this one, is Roman and I 1 thing and then being brought into special session the other thing? Does that confuse anybody else or is it just me? Okay, so I sent an email, Mr. Chairman, to our LSO staff, to Mr. Gruber, to Mr. Obrecht, to see if they could, but I've not heard back, and just, you know, if we could, maybe we could have them come run up here and help us to define that better, for at least, unless you guys all understand it. But I'm thinking that it would be the earlier 2 if you go into session, or if they certify that they don't need to go into session, then that would free his authority to expend the funds, except or that's right.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
question for Representative Larson. So LSO has looked at this and we feel pretty good that it's constitutional as drafted. In other words, we don't have a legislative veto problem.
Actually, the information that I think we received back from LSO was they felt that this language was important to stay in compliance with the Constitution, or the intent of the Constitution, separation of powers.
So yeah, I would recommend that let's adopt this amendment, and then if they have a tweak or two on it, you just take care of it.
Okay,
Then you can modify the amendment.
and that's fine with me. I just think it reads a little wonky to me, but most things do.
And so with that, I think we all understand the bill. We've been through it twice. Is there any public discussion on the bill? Seeing none, we'll close public discussion. There's a motion on the bill. Move to pass by Representative Walters, seconded by Representative Evans.
Question,
Let's do the amendment.
question on the amendment?
Question on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That motion carries. And you have the leeway to do tweak it to make it more conforming so we understand it. And then just proceed with that. So let's go back to the bill. Roll call, please. Hey, Don, did you understand our question? Please.
There we have it. Ask and you shall receive.
There we
And
go.
so
There's number
the,
two.
Mr.
Vaccines,
Chairman,
just
members
on-
of the
just on
committee, that
vaccine.
Well, no, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And so, Don, we had this on the backside of our single page one.
oh, okay.
But so what I didn't understand there is, so then the governor may not accept the funds until either certification or the 40 days has gone by. Those are the two. What if we let you go into special session?
Mr. Chairman, the amendment would contemplate that you meet and resolve that within the 40-day deadline. If you do not, then the
Okay.
governor can proceed.
Very good. Very good. That was the question I had. So we're good.
Okay, we're good. Okay, roll call.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Don. Don, did you hear any of our discussions on on that bill for the blockchain? I did not. Sometime I'll get together with you when you have time. Because we're going to do some major amendments.
Okay, let's see, House Bill 150, I'll leave it open for Mr. Kinner to send in his vote. Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Schwartz, Representative Simpson,
Aye.
Representative Stith,
Aye.
Representative Walters. Chairman Nicholas.
All right. Okay, committee, and also, we put this as a late notice on the agenda. You should have a House Bill number 597. Which was passed out earlier. It's a draft number, yeah. And so what we need to do is, because we are on the last day of having bills numbered, what I would propose is that this become a House Appropriations bill. And what this bill does, it implements part of the directives that CLA has recommended to make the investment team within the Treasurer's Office independent. So that's what this does. And so we'll work this bill in more detail after we hear CLA. But what I want to do is we'll just take a vote to make this become a House bill, and I can take it down to LSO and get it signed off. But in essence, this takes the Investment Funds Committee and turns it into the Investment Funds Council. And then it will move over from the State Treasurer's Office, the Investment Funds team, so that they serve underneath the auspices of this council, kind of like a corporate council or a corporate board meeting, board, in essence. And then the IFC will have the ability, the council, to hire and fire the CIO. The state treasurer sits on the council as a member, but not as the chair unless elected by the council to be the chair. So it's just, the chair will elect its chairman. It also allows them to retain an employee or two to be the administrative assistant, to operate it, to set up the meetings, to do all those things. And then to work in conjunction with the state treasurer's office on coordinating back office work and that type of stuff with the Investment Funds Council. The Investment Funds Council reports to SLIB as their primary entity, because they do the investment review on the policy and allocation of asset allocations, things like that. So those recommendations would then go to SLIB coming out of the IFC. But the whole point of this is to make our investment team as independent and not subject to the political whims of anybody as possible. Because that's by far, I mean, I think it's uncontested that that's the best practices in the industry. And the IFC had made this recommendation, in essence, to the CapFin back in December. The CLA initial reports did the same thing, said that this needs to be independent. And so that's what this bill does. And we'll have time to work through it and discuss it as we work it again. And we'll bring it back up and take public testimony on it. We'll have the opportunity of the treasurer to review it and come back. Testimony. The IFC, they're meeting at the end of this week, 4th. And so they'll have a chance to review it. So we'll send it out to them as soon as it becomes a bill as well, to get their comments on it. And we'll see if we can turn this thing over as quickly as possible, but I anticipate there being some controversy and issues on it, so we'll see. But I think it's imperative that we begin the process and that we have the debate, so. After CLE, so sometime, yeah. Monday? Or this week if we have time. Time permitting.
Well, that's because we're doing CLA Friday.
No, they're today. 4 o'clock.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
several of these bills that we have promoted are likely going to be vetoed by the governor. And I'd just like to stress the importance of us timely progressing those through the process as quick as we can so that we have a chance to override the veto on all these several ones that are controversial when time comes, instead of just going home and crossing our fingers.
Yep, I understand. Okay, so with that, committee, all those in favor of adopting this as a House bill, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, that motion carries, and so we will take this and it will be numbered as the House Appropriations bill. All right? All right, anything else? Oh, we've got 26, re-referral.
I had sent, Mr. Chairman, I had sent a text and left a note to Chairman Burkhart. This, you'll recall this bill, House Bill 26, the fuel tax bill came through the Joint Transportation Committee. We was waiting for review of this stepped implementation amendment, if that would be the right term to use on the bill, and I've not heard back from him. Transportation.
Okay.
I texted him and just, yep. think that's right, and I think that that's right. This is being a re-referral, but we didn't have the amendment to go along to review. Is that right? So the adoption of the amendment or anything associated with that would be on the floor, correct? Yes, their amendment. That's right. Yeah. So I would recommend maybe, Mr. Chairman, that now that we have it, because I think we were ready to say do pass, but I think we've got the amendment now, and maybe I think we have the Wyoming Tax Association folks here take public comment, and then maybe we could. And county commissioners. And county commissioners.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ashley Harpstreet. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming Taxpayers Association. For those of you who don't know or that are listening in, Wyoming Taxpayers Association is a 501c4 think tank nonprofit organization with a 501c3 research arm. Wyoming Taxpayers Association takes positions based off the analysis of our cornerstones of taxation through our policy committee. Their recommendation is then forwarded on to our 21 board of directors for a decision. In the analysis, as I mentioned, we look at our 4 cornerstones. Is the tax justified? Is the tax equitable among taxpayers? Does the proposal create a stable revenue stream? And finally, is the tax transparent, visible, accountable, and audible? Based off that criteria, Mr. Chairman, WTA supports House Bill 26 fuel tax as it is sound tax policy for these reasons. It is justified as there is at least a $196 million shortfall in the WYDOT surface transportation budget as indicated from the study from DI Management. It is equitable as the user pays for the miles driven for the fuel utilized. It is stable as it is any other user fee. It is transparent as it is the tax is visible, accountable, and audible with current systems. In closing, by doing nothing to adequately invest in our transportation system, we are simply passing the expense to build a transportation system to future generation. It is not fiscally sensible to do so, and it is contrary to fiscally conservative principles. I also want to note this is the one bill I support right now, so I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll stand for questions.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one question.
Sure.
So does the Taxpayer Association prefer the bill or the bill as amended?
I think the bill as amended is fine as long as we can get to the finish line of raising revenue to support our roads.
Thank you.
We don't have a
Mr. Chairman,
preference.
do we know if any of the surrounding states are looking at raising theirs? Because this will put us above most of our surrounding states.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, I'm not sure. I do have some information on where we sit regionally that I could send to you after this presentation. I don't know what they're considering right now.
Ms. Little?
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Kelly Little. I'm with the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. The WCCA has taken a position of support on this bill. We understand the need, not only in WYDOT, but also in our county road fund budgets. The counties are in charge of maintaining just under 15,000 miles of road. And so we definitely see the need and we support this bill. I'll stand for any questions.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, if I may, just like to thank these ladies. They've been chasing us for 2 days now. And we appreciate that and apologize for the delays.
Okay. Anybody in the,
Well, we have Mr. Reiner, Director Reiner and Mr. Byrne, but they haven't indicated they want to speak. Is that, Director, do you want to weigh in?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Luke Reiner, Director of WYDOT. Chairman, I was here this morning. I certainly have some information I can pass if it's of use to you that we submitted. I can run through that quickly, which may answer some of your background questions, specifically one that Representative Walters asked.
Sure, go ahead.
You bet. If we did send in a handout to you, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you have that handy. We sent it electronically, and I think Ryan was going to pass it out.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just go to the second slide on that handout, which is really a bunch of pictures. And that's the condition of some of our infrastructure across the state. And what I'd share with you, 2 talking points on those slides. One is the obvious safety issue. You know, the picture on the right is of a hole in on a bridge. The engineers call that a skylight. But if you hit that on a motorcycle, it's a bad day. We fix that one. But that's one issue with sort of, you know, we just aren't maintaining our roads the way we should. And the other really talking point for us as the state is this fact of the impact on our economy of really not maintaining our roads and infrastructure crumbling. The picture on the top left is of a bridge over the Snake River. We lost that one and had to load rate it last year. If the detour, it was 2 hours into Idaho. So that's right on the west side of Jackson, and you really have to cross into it to get into Jackson if you're coming that way. And so if you're trying to ship cattle, and we had people trying to ship cattle, you had to bring in lots more trucks at greater expense because you couldn't take your truck because it's too heavy over the road. So economy for our state and safety is sort of the issue at hand. If you flip to the next slide, that's just really, I think for you as appropriators, it's the trend. And you can see, you know, really our revenue going back to 1996, and you can see an increase until about 2010. And then really the line is stabilized in terms of total appropriations, but you can see the declining line to the right, which is really the inflation adjusting buying power for our department. And you understand the effects of that. If you flip over to the next slide, then, Mr. Chairman, that really is, hey, where does the money come from for WYDOT? And many of you have lived this over the years. So you go back to 2002, and you can see there the effects of de-earmarking. So that's that. And then you can see the different colors. Probably a couple things that I point out to you came off the general fund in 2017. And there was an increase in vehicle registration fees in that year to help offset that. And it came pretty close. The other item that I typically point out on this slide is percentage of federal revenue to state revenue. For us in Wyoming, we actually enjoy a lot of federal revenue and do very good on that area. And my thanks to Senator Brasso and his leadership on the EPW committee to really help ensure the formula favors rural states. Obviously, there's a change there. Don't know where that will go in the future. In the national average is that actually states provide a bigger percentage of income than the federal government into their DOTs. So that's a data point for us. The takeaway here really on the percentage of state to federal is that there are some grants now that we do not put in for because we don't have the state match. And so that's really become part of the issue on state funding. And Mr. Chairman, I should have said, if there's some questions, please stop me as we go. If you flip to the next slide, there's several talking points, and this one.
Excuse me, Director Reiner. I'm looking at this, the amount of fuel taxes collected, and clearly it dropped off lately because of less travel. Are you seeing an uptick in the last few months?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, we are in total are still less than we would be comparable to last year and where we're at. In terms of total miles traveled on the road, we're about 1% down now compared to the same time last year is where we are. So yes, we have had less fuel tax collected this year. We think that's coming back, but certainly is something we're tracking very closely in this COVID environment. Mr. Chairman, relative to the slide that shows really a green, amber, and red bar, the talking point on that is when to maintain roads, because the deterioration curve on the road is exponential and not linear. And what we know is that if you spend $1 now keeping a road in good condition, it saves us money down the road. And uh, the trends that we see, and I'm a trend type guy, is that our good roads percentage is going down and our fair or bad roads is going up. And so those are trends that are negative. Mr. Chairman, I'm often asked, hey, WIDOT, what have you done to save money? And I'll tell you, we do focus on that a lot in terms of being fiscal stewards of what the state provides to us. And you can see the list on the left. So certainly we're about 10% down in staff. We have closed some rest areas. We've cut some of what we spend in snow removal and really delayed projects. And so there's that's part of, you know, the standard briefing that we give. About 34% of our roads right now we think are in poor, bad condition and getting worse. Mr. Chairman, if you flip to the next slide, it's really what we think is our unfunded operating needs. When I came into this job 2 years ago, the number that was handed to me was 135 million short a year. I said, hey, let's review that and make sure we completely understand where we're at. You can see the list there. So Dime Management gave us a report, and that's been referred to here in the past just this morning by Ms. Harstreet, but about $354 million short per year for all of WIDOT. But that really comes out to be about 196 for the roads, which is really the focus of the discussion this morning. And you can scan down through here. You know, WIDOT's unique in terms of all the DOTs across the nation in what's in it, which I think is pertinent for a small state. But certainly that's the recognized needs as we speak. Mr. Chairman, if you flip the next slide, the guiding principles, really what we've put out in terms of internal and external is how we'll focus spending our money. And, you know, we could have a long discussion on that, but the short story is that we want to make sure that revenue aligns with expenses in terms of the color of money. We want to make sure that we identify strict safety issues. For that bridge over the Snake was an example. And then the next one down is preserving the assets that we have. And that's really our focus right now is basically every job we do on the road. And last year we did about 90, and this year we'll do about the same, is all focused on asset preservation and not expanding our capacity and ability. And
So
the
Director,
next,
I'm
yes,
just-
sir.
So what I'm curious of that, we saw the numbers before, but how much of the diesel and the gas are paid by in-state versus out-of-state drivers? Do you have that breakdown?
Mr. Chairman, in terms of total traffic, if you look at car traffic, about 15% comes from out of state, and 85% then comes from in-state. In terms of heavy traffic, it's about 65% from 65 and 35.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Director Reiner, I think I may recognize the bridge on page 1 with the skylight. I understand mile marker 101 on I-80 outside Rock Springs, there's a bridge that's been severely damaged, and that WIDOT has just entered into a contract to demolish that bridge, but also, if I understand it correctly, to build a new interstate interchange there in Rock Springs at a cost of about $19 million. So my question is this: I think that bridge needs to be taken down, but would the department consider terminating that contract for convenience if you could do so to save $12 million? And why I say that is because Rock Springs already has 4 interstate exits for a town of 24,000. It seems like building, if my information is correct, building a new interstate exit at mile marker 101 doesn't really make a lot of sense. So is that something that's on your radar screen?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, our representative, that's an interesting question. That particular project, actually, we've been working on a federal grant for many years to receive. That grant did come in, and the grant is specifically for that expansion based on economic development on that side. So it's a good question you ask. I'll research that a little bit. I think the answer is we're probably too far down the road with that allotment of federal money to change where it goes.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. And Director, and I guess I'm not familiar with exactly how much state money is involved. I am familiar with the local component, which is 25%. And so the city of Rock Springs is obligated to pay $5 million for this interstate exit that frankly will not have any economic development value, I don't think. But so that's just my opinion on that. But thank you for considering it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, thank you.
So I think we need to wrap it up here pretty quickly.
You bet, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, on the next slide, you'll just see we did receive a one-time allotment of in recent reauthorization, which was basically a backstop into states. That's about $63 million that has been allocated out to the roads as we speak. The next slide is, Mr. Chairman, and really to Chairman or to Representative Walters' question about where are we at with fuel tax. You'll see the chart there. So a 9-cent increase makes us equivalent to Idaho. It's the same to Montana and about the same with Utah. And so that's where we're at right now. I have not heard of anybody currently in those states seeking a fuel tax increase. And then the last slide there, Mr. Chairman, really would talk about where does this money go? And as was indicated by Ms. Little, certainly the percent of, a large percentage goes to counties, some goes to municipalities, certainly some goes to the parks, and the rest goes to White House. Mr. Chairman, that's a quick background on data that was involved and would stand for any questions you have.
Okay, thanks. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we will close public comment. We have a motion on the bill.
Second.
Move to pass Representative Larson, second by Representative Walters as amended. Roll call.
Oh, hello. Yeah, the amendment isn't, so it's a do pass.
Do pass.
Okay, just to be clear. Let's see, I'll leave it open for Mr. Kinner, Mr. Larson, Representative Larson, Representative Schwartz, Representative Simpson.
Aye.
Representative Stiff,
Aye.
Representative Walters, Chairman Nicholas.
Is it one or new? One or new, one of those. And then at 4. And we're down.
At noon, you guys are in PMR 6, down in the connector, room 6. And then at the 4 o'clock, you're back up here.
Well, we don't, I think that's